Good evening, Moon Princess here, and tonight we're going to talk about a true crime case. This is the case of Mary Vincent. I have my computer in my lap, so if I'm looking down, I'm looking at my notes. So, just going to give a trigger warning here. This is a very triggering case. It takes place in 1978. There is sexual assault, there's violence, there's murder. If those topics are too sensitive for you, I would recommend you watch a different video. This is a true crime case after all. So, like I said, 1978, Berkeley, California, where a lot of these things happened in California. September 29th. This was also featured in I Survived, which is from A&E. So Mary needed a break from her parents and their stressful divorce. She wanted to be alone, so she decided to hitch a ride to LA. So she's 15 years old, hitchhiking. She accepts a ride with a man by the name of Lawrence Singleton, a merchant marine seaman who other hitchhikers had told her not to accept a ride with. Especially since he was only going to accept a ride with her and nobody else. That's a huge red flag. Especially since he had such a decent-sized van and plenty of room, but he claimed that he could only take her. So immediately, like, no. Mary described him as seeming grandfatherly, that she saw him as non-threatening. Initially, she accepted a ride. He said he would take her to Route 5. By the time they reached Route 5, Mary realized something was very wrong. She says that she had been napping in the van, woke up at some point, and realized that he had started driving in the wrong direction. She asked him to turn the car around. He claimed it was an honest mistake and proceeded to head in the direction of Interstate 5. At some point, Mary told him that she needed to piss and could not wait to reach the gas station. Sorry. He told Mary that he needed to piss and that he couldn't wait until the gas station. This is when things get worse for Mary. Mary also gets out of the car. She bends to tie her shoelaces, thinking if I need to run, they should be tied. She's obviously sensing that something is not right. And she is abruptly hit over the head from behind with a hammer. I believe it's a hammer. By Singleton. When next she comes to, Mary's tied up in the van and forced to drink alcohol. I feel like that's to disorient her, probably. She was raped and sodomized by Lawrence, and this went on until daybreak. She begged him to let her go, but in her words, she said, set her free. And she remembers saying those words specifically because he taunted her words. He takes her into the woods and he says, I'll set you free. And he hacks off her arms up to the elbow. She uses dirt to slow the blood loss. So I believe she said she was thrown off a cliff and left for dead by Singleton. He thought she was going to die. He may have already thought that she was dead. So this is over in Del Puerto Canyon in Stanislaus, if I'm saying that right, County. He did not expect anyone to find her, yet Mary, despite her blood loss, managed to climb back up without any arms, completely naked, covered in blood, and walk 3 miles to the highway to flag down help. She's a badass, I'm just saying. So, first car goes by, they're shocked by her appearance, and they drive away. They stop, drive away. I can understand why, but at the same time. So, 2 women were passing by on the highway and they assist her. They cover her. Obviously, they're shocked by her appearance. But they help her. She's holding her 2 mutilated limbs. And she's taken to the hospital. She was able to describe Lawrence Singleton, which allowed them to come up with an incredibly realistic composite sketch of the man. So much so that one of his neighbors recognized him from the sketch. Mary survived her attack perpetrated by Singleton, but has shared that she's not always felt like a survivor. That following her trauma, she just sunk into severe depression. She had been a dancer, and she had dreamed of dancing professionally. Unfortunately, with one of her reconstructive surgeries, this became impossible. So Mary had worked center stage at Lido de Paris in Las Vegas, and she had worked in Australia and Hawaii. As they had to take part of her legs for her arms, this is why she was no longer able to dance. She also talks about having night terrors following her attack and how she struggled to find work. This so much so that at one point she could not afford to repair her prosthetic limbs and later had to file for bankruptcy. So Singleton ends up being sentenced to 14 years. He serves 8, and he ends up out on good behavior. This is despite the fact he sent numerous threatening letters to Mary Vincent's lawyer for Mary, and despite the fact that his psychiatric evaluation stated because he is so out of touch with his hostility and anger, he remains an elevated threat to others' safety inside and outside of prison. So you would think that would be concerning, of course, but so Mary lived in fear he would come after her and harm her again. She went through, this depression after surviving this horrid ordeal. So, like I said, Singleton only ends up serving around 8 years before he's released. I believe it's on good behavior. He moves from California to Florida to start over because obviously nobody in California wants him around and amongst them based on his crimes, okay? His parole was protested at the time it occurred. People were all around. They were holding banners that read, "Drop Dead Larry," and "Get the Maniac Out." Several years later in Tampa, Florida, police are called by a painter. I believe he was a neighbor. He had witnessed seeing a nude man lift his arms repeatedly, leaning over a woman drenched in blood, who was limp and slouched on the couch. He is quoted as saying that he heard bones crushing like chicken bones breaking. Upon arriving on the scene, what did they find? A bloody Singleton. The victim here was Roxanne Hayes, a 31-year-old sex worker and mother of 3. She attended Singleton in exchange for $20. She was stabbed to death by Singleton with a boning knife. It has also been mentioned that Roxanne was trying to rob Singleton and that this enraged him. It had been 20 years since Mary's attack at this point. Mary came out again to testify against Singleton. She had hoped initially to get him locked up permanently, but the first time, unfortunately, the system failed and Singleton was let out. Free to, given free rein despite the justice system being clearly aware of the monster that he is. She comes back to make sure he gets locked up again. This was, after 20 years following her attack. She testifies saying, "I was raped. I had my arms cut off. He used a hatchet. He left me to die." She points her prosthetic limbs in his direction as she speaks. Based on the brutal nature of his crimes, capital punishment was recommended. Singleton was placed on death row, though he ends up passing away from cancer in 2001. The son of a, But yeah, she is a badass. She said, so 20 years ago, Mary Vincent got into Mr. Singleton's van. Some 20 years later, Roxanne Hayes got into Mr. Singleton's van. She, unlike Mary Vincent, did not survive her meeting with Lawrence Singleton. But Mary's a badass. Mary's life has improved. So she developed talents as an artist. And she began to act as a victim's advocate, inspired by her own experience. She talks about the dangers of hitchhiking. She married her bodyguard, Tom, though they divorced 2 years later, I believe. But they had 2 sons together. Mary attended the University of Nevada. In the past, Mary had no skills at drawing, but following her attack, this part of her developed and blossomed, and it made her feel good about herself and confident. Singleton is described as a national symbol of the shortfalls within the criminal justice system, the leniency towards his incarceration and then subsequent release. Had he not been released, the murder of Roxanne Hayes could have been prevented. So that's kind of the big takeaway from this. But I also just love the fact that, you know, that Mary Vincent survived, and she put meaning in her life after this horrible, traumatic experience that she went through. So it gives me hope and makes my heart a little happy. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. I know it's a little short, but thank you so much for watching. Good night.